The Accidental Influencer. Chapter 1. The Lesson. I was 78 years old when I learned what a hashtag was. And let me tell you, I thought my granddaughter was having me on. Why would anyone want to tag a hash? The only hash I knew came from a tin and tasted like regret. No, Gran, Emily said. Her fingers flying across that glowing rectangle she carried everywhere. It's how people find things online. Like if you post about your garden, you'd write #garden. But why? I asked, squinting at the screen. The letters were so small I could barely see them, even with my reading glasses perched on the end of my nose. Because that's just how it works, she said, in that tone young people use when they're trying very hard not to sound exasperated. Look, I've set up your account. Your Dorothy does tech now. I most certainly am not doing tech, I protested. I can barely work the microwave without setting off the smoke alarm. Emily laughed, that bright sound that reminded me of wind chimes. She was my son's daughter, 23 and full of the sort of optimism I'd forgotten existed. She visited every Sunday, mostly out of duty, I suspected. Though she was kind enough to pretend otherwise. It's easy, Gran. You just take a photo, write something funny about it, and post it. That's all. Why would anyone want to see photos of my life? She looked at me then, really looked at me. And something shifted in her expression. Because your life is interesting. You always tell me the best stories. Why not share them with more people? I thought about the stories I'd collected over the years, like loose change in a jar. The time I accidentally joined a protest march in 1972. Because I thought they were queuing for a closing down sale. The afternoon I served the Queen Mother a cup of tea at a village fete and called her Duck because I was nervous. The night I danced with an American soldier during the war, and he taught me to jitterbug in the ruins of a bombed-out ballroom. Stories were all I had left, really. My husband Arthur had been gone for 12 years. My knees were shot. My garden had become too much to manage. The weeds had staged a successful coup, and were now running the place like tiny green dictators. But the stories, those were still mine. All right, I said. Show me how this works. That's how it started. In my cluttered living room on a drizzly Sunday afternoon. With Emily's patient voice guiding me through something called TikTok. Though I kept wanting to call it TikTok, like the sound a clock makes, which seemed more sensible. Emily spent 2 hours showing me the basics. How to hold the phone. Not like that, Gran, you'll only get your chin. How to tap the red button to record. No, that's the volume. The other button. How to write captions without accidentally triggering something called autocorrect, which seemed determined to make me sound either drunk or unhinged. What if I press the wrong thing and break it? I asked. You can't break it, Gran. Just try. I once broke a calculator by pressing it too enthusiastically. That's actually impressive. By the time she left, my head was spinning with information I was certain would evaporate the moment the door closed. Apps and filters and algorithms. It was like learning a foreign language. Except the language was designed by people who'd never met a vowel they liked. Chapter 2. Going viral. Whatever that means. My first post was a disaster. I'd taken a photo of my burnt toast. Properly cremated, the way I'd somehow managed despite owning the toaster for 30 years. And written, Still haven't mastered this contraption. Arthur used to do the toast. Now I eat charcoal for breakfast. I stared at it for 10 minutes before pressing post, certain I'd done something wrong. Then I put the phone down and tried to forget about it. Failed spectacularly, of course. Kept picking it up every few minutes to see if anything had happened. 3 people had liked it. I didn't know who they were. By bedtime, it was 27 likes. I went to sleep thinking that was rather nice. 27 strangers who'd seen my burnt toast and hadn't minded. I woke up to chaos. My phone was buzzing like a trapped wasp. Notifications kept popping up, one after another, faster than I could read them. I thought something had gone terribly wrong. That I'd accidentally done something illegal. That the police would be knocking any moment to arrest me for improper use of telecommunications. I showed it to Emily the next Sunday. She stared at her phone for a long moment, her eyes getting progressively wider. Then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Gran," she said slowly. "This has 400,000 likes. Is that good?" She made a noise somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. "You've gone viral." "Oh God, is it serious? Do I need antibiotics?" This time she did laugh, properly, until tears rolled down her cheeks. "No, no. It means loads of people have seen it. You're famous, Gran." Famous. Me. Dorothy Winters. Who wore the same 3 cardigans on rotation, and whose idea of excitement was a new flavor of biscuit at the shop. Emily scrolled through the comments, reading them aloud. "This is the saddest thing I've ever read and also hilarious. The way this made me cry laugh. Arthur would be proud of your honesty, Dorothy. I'm not crying, you're crying." She looked up. "They love you. They don't know me," I said. But something warm had lodged itself in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in years. A sense of being seen, of mattering. "They want to, though. Look, you've got 50,000 followers already." Followers. Like I was the Pied Piper, leading thousands of people through the streets. Except I was just an old woman with burnt toast, and a mobile phone I barely understood. Emily helped me make more posts that afternoon. She was patient, showing me again how to frame a photo. How to write text that wasn't accidentally in all capitals. Apparently that was shouting and considered rude. Though I'd only been trying to see the letters better. A photo of my cat, Mr. Tibbs, sprawled across the newspaper I was trying to read. My editor is very demanding and works for kibble. A picture of my medication organizer. My social calendar. All the best parties are at 8 a.m. and involve pills. A shot of my TV remote, which had at least 40 buttons I'd never used. NASA called. They want their control panel back. Each one somehow found thousands of people who thought an elderly woman's mundane disasters were worth their time. It baffled me, but Emily said that was part of the appeal. "You're authentic," she explained. "Everyone online is trying so hard to be perfect. You're just you." I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted. Being just me hadn't seemed particularly special for the past 7 decades. By the end of that Sunday, I had 200,000 followers. Emily kept refreshing the page, watching the number tick upward like some kind of hypnotic slot machine. "This is mental," she kept saying. This is absolutely mental, Gran. I rather agreed, though I wasn't entirely sure what this was. Chapter 3. The comments section. The strangest part wasn't the numbers. Though watching those tick upward was oddly hypnotic. Like a sort of digital knitting. But the people who appeared in what Emily called the comments section. They came from everywhere. A woman in Australia who said my posts reminded her of her late grandmother. A young man in Canada who was caring for his elderly mother and found my jokes helped him through hard days. A teacher in Manchester who showed my posts to her students to prove that old people could be funny. Someone in Japan who was using my posts to learn English. At first, I didn't respond. What would I say? But then someone commented. Dorothy, your husband sounds like he was a wonderful man. I lost my wife last year and your posts helped me feel less alone. I stared at that for a long time. This person. A complete stranger named Frank from somewhere called Ohio. Was grieving. And somehow my burnt toast had made him feel less alone in that grief. I tapped out a reply. My arthritic fingers slow on the screen. Arthur was terrible at DIY and once painted the cat by accident. But yes, he was wonderful. I'm sorry about your wife. The aloneness is the hardest part, isn't it? The man replied within minutes. Yes. Yes, it is. Nobody talks about how loud the silence gets. Like living in a snow globe, I wrote back. Beautiful and quiet and completely suffocating. And just like that, I was having conversations again. Real conversations, not the lovely weather and how are you keeping exchanges that peppered my actual life like polite punctuation marks. These people wanted to know things. They asked about my life during the war. About my work as a telephone operator. About the dance halls and the fashions. And what it felt like to live through so much change. A woman named Claire asked what it was like to watch the moon landing. I'd forgotten about that. But her question brought it rushing back. Sitting in front of our tiny black and white television with Arthur. Both of us holding our breath as Neil Armstrong took those first steps. Arthur had cried. Properly cried. We're walking on the moon, he'd said. The bloody moon. I told Claire about that. About how impossible it had seemed. How magical. About how Arthur had taken me outside afterward, and we'd stood in the garden looking up at the moon. And he'd said, there are people up there right now. Walking about. Having a brew, probably. Claire replied. That made me cry. Thank you for sharing that. Dozens of others chimed in with their own memories. Or asking questions about what else I'd seen. The coronation. The Beatles. Decimalization, which still annoyed me because I'd never properly got my head around the new money. Someone asked if I remembered rationing, and I spent 20 minutes typing out a response about making a birthday cake with powdered eggs and no sugar. And how we'd sung around it anyway because that's what you did. I found myself remembering things I'd tucked away. The way the streets smelled after rain during the Blitz. Like electricity and fear. The feel of silk stockings. So rare and precious we'd draw lines up the backs of our bare legs with eyebrow pencil to fake the seams. The first time I saw television and thought it was pure magic. Pictures flying through the air and landing in a box in someone's parlor. Emily taught me how to record videos. Just talk to the camera like you're talking to me, she said. But I can see you. The camera's just a dead-eyed little circle. Pretend it's a person. A friend. I felt ridiculous at first. Sitting in my armchair. The one with the permanently compressed cushion shaped exactly like my bottom. And talking to a phone propped on a stack of books. But Emily was right. Once I started, it felt like telling stories to a friend. Just a friend I couldn't see. Who also happened to be 2 million people. I told them about the time I accidentally auditioned for a theater production. Because I'd gone to the wrong building, and was too polite to leave once they'd handed me a script. About working at the telephone exchange and listening to people's conversations when I got bored. Which I definitely wasn't supposed to do, but everyone did anyway. About the day Arthur proposed by leaving a ring in my teacup, which I nearly swallowed. The videos were even more popular than the photos. Dorothy's dispatch, they started calling them. I rather liked that. Made me sound official. Like a war correspondent. One video in particular seemed to strike a chord. I'd been talking about loneliness. About how strange it was to have lived a whole life and suddenly find yourself with no one to tell your day to. People think loneliness is about being alone, I said to the camera. But you can be lonely in a crowd. You can be lonely surrounded by people who love you. The real loneliness is when you stop mattering to yourself. When your own life starts to feel like a story nobody wants to hear. That video got 8 million views. 8 million. I couldn't fathom it. Chapter 4. The Recognition. Things got peculiar about 3 months in. I was at the supermarket, debating between 2 identical tins of soup. Habit, really. Since they were both the same price and I'd probably end up not liking either of them. When a young woman approached me. "Excuse me," she said, her phone already out. "Are you Dorothy Does Tech?" I looked around, wondering if I was being pranked. If this was some elaborate scheme where I'd end up on television looking like a fool. Yes? She actually squealed. Actually made a noise like a kettle at full boil. Oh my God. Can I get a photo? My nan follows you religiously. You're her hero. She's 92 and you've made her want to get on social media. We took a photo. Me looking startled, her beaming like she'd met royalty. She posted it immediately, her thumbs flying across the screen faster than seemed humanly possible. Look who I met buying soup. Hashtag Dorothy Does Tech. Hashtag accidental icon. It happened twice more that week. Once at the post office, where a teenage boy asked for a selfie and called me a legend. Once at the doctor's surgery, where another elderly woman grabbed my hand and said, "You've made me feel less alone. Thank you." That last one nearly did me in. I had to sit in my car for 10 minutes afterward. Crying in that ugly way you do when you're trying not to. All gasping breaths and hiccups. People recognized me. Me. A woman whose most distinguishing feature had been her invisibility for the better part of 2 decades. I'd spent years feeling like a ghost in my own life. Drifting through rooms and streets and shops without anyone really seeing me. And now strangers were stopping me in Tesco. The local paper wanted an interview. Then a radio station. Then someone from the TV called. Actually called my landline, which hadn't rung in months except for scam calls about car accidents I'd never had. And asked if I'd be interested in being part of a documentary about social media and the elderly. I think they've got the wrong person, I told Emily. I'm not interesting enough for the TV. Gran, she said, showing me the screen. You have 2 million followers now. You're definitely interesting enough. 2 million. I couldn't picture 2 million people. I'd lived in the same village for 40 years and knew maybe 200 faces well enough to nod at. Now 2 million strangers had decided my life was worth watching. The attention should have felt invasive, but it didn't. It felt like waking up from a very long nap and discovering the world had been waiting for you, after all. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally someone had said, "You can breathe now." Emily helped me navigate it all. She showed me how to ignore the occasional nasty comment. There were a few people who thought I was attention-seeking or pathetic, which seemed rather harsh for someone just posting about soup. She explained what brand deals were when companies started offering me money to post about their products. They want to pay me to take a photo of their biscuits? I asked. Yes. But I don't even like their biscuits. They're too sweet. Then say no, Gran. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. I liked that. The power to say no. I'd spent so much of my life saying yes to things I didn't want. Committees and obligations and polite conversations that went nowhere. Now I could just choose. Chapter 5. The questions I asked myself. Late at night, when Mr. Tibbs was asleep on my lap, and the house creaked in that familiar way old houses do, I found myself thinking about what had changed. Not the followers or the recognition, though those were strange enough, but something deeper. Something to do with the way I saw myself. For years after Arthur died, I'd felt like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. All the colors faded, the details blurred. I was someone's widow. Someone's grandmother. The old lady at number 47 who couldn't manage her recycling bins properly, and whose wheelie bin was always out on the wrong day. I'd stopped thinking of myself as Dorothy. Not really. I was just old. Old woman. Old person. Old. But now, reading through the comments, watching the numbers climb, I was becoming someone again. Not someone new. Emily had been right about that, I was just myself. But someone visible. Someone whose stories mattered. Someone who could make a stranger in Ohio feel less alone, or make a teenager laugh, or help a 92-year-old woman feel brave enough to try something new. There was a melancholy to it, though. A grief underneath the joy. I couldn't share this with Arthur, couldn't laugh with him about the absurdity of being internet famous at 78. He'd have found it hilarious. He'd have insisted on being in the videos, probably would have performed terrible magic tricks or told his awful jokes. The ones where he'd laugh before reaching the punchline and then forget how it ended. I missed him in waves. Some days it was a gentle lapping at the shore, bearable. Other days it was a tsunami that knocked me flat. The success, the attention, the sudden mattering. It made me miss him more, not less. Because what was the point of wonderful things if you had no one to tell about them? One night, I made a video addressing this directly. Me in my armchair. Mr. Tibbs purring in the background. My reading lamp casting that warm yellow glow everyone said made my videos cozy. People keep asking if this has changed my life, I said to the camera. And the honest answer is yes and no. I'm still old. My knees still hurt. I still burn toast and forget why I've walked into a room. The other day I spent 10 minutes looking for my glasses while wearing them. So nothing's changed there. I paused, scratching Mr. Tibbs behind his ear. He yawned, showing all his teeth, completely unimpressed by my internet fame. But I feel less forgotten, I suppose. For a long time, I thought my interesting days were behind me. That I'd had my turn, told my stories, and now I was just waiting. Waiting for what, I couldn't tell you. The end, probably. But turns out, you can have interesting days at any age. They just look different. Less jitterbug, more gigabytes. Whatever those are. I looked directly at the camera, at those 2 million invisible faces. The thing is, when you get to be my age, people stop asking you questions. They tell you things. How you should live, what you should do. That you should be careful. That you should slow down. That you should accept your limitations. But you lot, you ask me questions. About my life, my stories, my opinions. What was it like? What do I think? What do I remember? And it's made me realize I still have opinions. Rather a lot of them, actually. I'd just forgotten anyone wanted to hear them. That video got 5 million views. The comments section filled with people sharing their own experiences of feeling invisible, of being overlooked, of thinking their stories didn't matter. Old people, yes, but young people too. Teenagers who felt ignored. Middle-aged people who felt stuck. Parents who'd lost themselves in parenthood. People who felt like their lives were too ordinary to be interesting. Your stories always matter, I replied to one comment. Even the boring ones. Especially the boring ones. The boring ones are usually the truest. A woman wrote, I'm 45 and I thought my life was over. You've made me realize I might be halfway through. A man wrote, I've been ignoring my grandmother. I'm going to call her tomorrow. Dozens wrote, Thank you for existing. That last one always got me. Thank you for existing. As if my simple continued presence in the world was a gift to someone. Chapter 6. The Interview. The TV sent a very earnest young man named Oliver to interview me. He arrived with a camera crew. 3 people who immediately filled my small living room with equipment and cables and lights that made everything look like an operating theater. They spent an hour rearranging my furniture. We need to make it more authentic, Oliver said. Which seemed ridiculous given that it was actually my living room, and therefore already authentic. But apparently, authentic meant something different to television people. They moved my photographs around, adjusted the lighting, asked if I could maybe wear something a bit more colorful. I'm 78, I said. I've earned the right to wear beige if I want to. Oliver laughed nervously. Of course, of course. You're absolutely right. The beige is perfect. Very on brand. On brand. As if I was a product. A tin of soup. A particularly dull shade of paint. The interview itself was strange. He asked the questions you'd expect. How did I start? What did I think of my success? Did I understand the technology? No, not really. But I was good at pressing buttons until something happened. I told him about Emily, about the burnt toast, About waking up to find 400,000 people had decided my breakfast disaster was worth their time. He laughed at all the right moments, nodded seriously when I talked about loneliness. But then he asked, "Do you think there's a lesson here? About aging, about relevance, about society?" I thought about that for a long moment. Mr. Tibbs chose that moment to jump onto my lap, nearly knocking over the microphone they'd clipped to my cardigan. "I suppose," I said slowly, stroking the cat, "the lesson is that people are lonely. Not just old people. Everyone. And sometimes it helps to hear someone else's story. To know you're not the only one burning toast, or missing someone, or feeling like the world has moved on without you. I'm not special. I'm just willing to admit that life is sometimes quite sad and quite funny, often at exactly the same time." Oliver nodded enthusiastically. "That's brilliant. Could you say that again, but maybe punchier?" I gave him a look that could have stripped paint. "No." He shifted uncomfortably. "Right. No, that's fine. That was perfect." They also wanted to film me, doing social media. Which meant me sitting with my phone, pretending to scroll and laugh and type, while they filmed me from 7 different angles. It felt deeply unnatural, like being an actor in a play about my own life. "Can you look more surprised?" Oliver asked. "Like you've just seen something amazing?" "I'm looking at photos of someone's lunch," I said. "I'm not going to pretend it surprised me." The crew tried not to laugh. Oliver made a note on his clipboard. They filmed for 6 hours. 6 hours to make what Emily told me would be a 15-minute segment. The mathematics of that seemed wasteful. But what did I know about television? When they finally left, my living room looked like it had been ransacked. Furniture at odd angles, cables still snaking across the floor, mysterious black marks on the carpet where they'd put their equipment. I sat in my displaced armchair and laughed. Properly laughed. At the absurdity of it all. At the earnest young man with his clipboard and his talk of authenticity. At myself, for agreeing to any of this. Emily came round to watch it with me when it aired on a Tuesday evening. She brought wine and those crisps I liked. The prawn cocktail ones that tasted nothing like prawns or cocktails but somehow still worked. Seeing myself on television was bizarre. I looked ancient. Properly ancient, like something excavated from a bog. But I also looked alive. My eyes were bright. I laughed at one point. A proper belly laugh at some joke Oliver had made that hadn't seemed funny at the time but worked on camera. "You look happy, Gran," Emily said softly. "I suppose I am," I replied, surprised to realize it was true. The documentary sparked another surge of followers. 3 million now. The number had stopped meaning anything. It was just a number, digits on a screen. What mattered more were the individual stories, the individual people who reached out. Like the woman who told me she'd started journaling because of my videos. Or the man who'd reconnected with his estranged sister after 40 years. Or the teenager who said my posts about Arthur had helped her understand her grieving grandfather better. These were the things that mattered. Not the numbers. The connections. Chapter 7. The Real Connection. 6 months after Emily first showed me how to use TikTok, something unexpected happened. I received a message from a woman named Janet who lived 3 streets over from me. She'd been following me for months without realizing I was her neighbor. "I can't believe you're local," she wrote. "I've been watching your videos every day. I'm a widow too. I've been feeling so isolated since my husband died. Would you maybe want to meet for coffee?" We met the next Tuesday at the cafe in the village. The one that had changed hands 3 times in 5 years, and now served something called artisan toast for £5 a slice, which Arthur would have found offensive. Janet was 74. Sharp as a tack, with opinions about everything, and a laugh that could probably be heard in the next county. She wore a purple coat and too much lipstick, and I liked her immediately. "I've been watching your videos thinking, finally, someone who gets it," she said, stirring 3 sugars into her tea. "And you're 3 bloody streets away. I could have walked round months ago. Why didn't you?" She looked out the window at the high street, at the people passing by with their shopping bags and their purpose. "Same reason you didn't, I expect. Thought I was the only one feeling like this. Easier to watch someone on a screen than knock on a door. Less scary. Can't be rejected by a video." I understood that completely. The fear of reaching out and finding nothing there. The safety of watching life through a screen rather than living it. "Well," I said, "we're both idiots then." She laughed. "Absolute idiots. Should have done this years ago." We became friends, properly. Started meeting weekly, then twice weekly. She introduced me to her book club. 6 women who argued passionately about novels none of them had finished reading. I introduced her to Emily, who was delighted I'd made a real-life friend through my online presence, as if the two were completely separate countries. Through Janet, I met others. Elizabeth, who lived alone with 17 houseplants she'd named after characters from Coronation Street. Maud, who was 86 and still drove despite having failed her last 3 eye tests. Beatrice, who made terrible wine in her bathtub and insisted we all try it. A whole network of people in the village who'd been quietly lonely, quietly getting by, quietly thinking they were the only ones. We started a weekly coffee morning. Nothing fancy, just meeting at the village hall on Thursdays, bringing biscuits, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes 8 of us would show up. Sometimes 20. People started bringing their own lonely friends, their isolated neighbors, their grieving relatives. The coffee mornings became the highlight of my week. Better than the followers, better than the comments, better even than the TV interview. Because these were real people, in real life, with real laughter that I could hear without having to turn up the volume. I still made my videos. Emily said consistency was important, whatever that meant. But they changed. Became less about my isolation and more about rediscovery. The small joys. The ridiculous moments. The way life could surprise you, even at 78. I posted about the coffee mornings. About Janet's terrible jokes. About Maud's driving, which terrified us all. About Elizabeth teaching me the names of her plants and getting genuinely upset when I couldn't remember if the spider plant was Ken Barlow or Mike Baldwin. The comments flooded in. People sharing their own stories of loneliness, of finding community, of being brave enough to reach out. Someone started a coffee morning in their own village, inspired by mine. Then someone else. Then someone else. Within a month, there were Dorothy-inspired coffee mornings happening in 12 different countries. I had nothing to do with most of them. Just provided the spark, I suppose. The permission to admit you were lonely and to do something about it. One evening, Janet and I were walking back from the pub quiz. We came last, but we'd had fun getting there, and Maud had been asked to leave for heckling the quizmaster. When she said, "You know what's funny? You went on social media to connect with strangers, and ended up connecting with your actual neighbors." She was right. The internet had somehow brought me back to my own street, my own community. I'd been living in this village for 40 years but really seeing it for about 6 months. I thought about all the people I'd walked past, nodded at politely, never really spoken to. All the potential Janets and Elizabeths and Mauds I'd missed. All the stories I'd never heard because I was too busy being lonely to realize other people were lonely too. It's stupid, isn't it? I said. That we needed technology to remind us to talk to each other. Not stupid, Janet said. Just human. We're all scared. All worried we'll bother people or be rejected or say the wrong thing. Easier to stay home. Stay safe. Stay lonely. But lonely isn't safe, I said. No, she agreed. It really isn't. That night, I made one last video from my armchair. Not a final video. I'd keep posting, keep sharing, keep connecting. But a kind of conclusion to this chapter. Someone asked me today if I regret not learning about social media sooner. I told the camera. And the truth is, no. I learned about it at exactly the right time. When I needed it. When I'd forgotten that my stories mattered, that I mattered. You lot reminded me, and then you gave me the confidence to actually live again, not just remember living. I paused, smiling at the absurdity of it all. I'm still rubbish with technology. I still burn toast. I still miss Arthur every single day. But I'm not invisible anymore. Not to you. Not to my neighbors, and most importantly, not to myself. Which is rather a lovely thing to discover at 78. Mr. Tibbs chose that moment to jump onto my lap, nearly knocking the phone out of my hand. He did this often during filming now, as if he knew when the camera was on and wanted his moment of fame. Little attention seeker. And that's my cue, I said, laughing. Tomorrow I'm going to attempt to bake a cake with the coffee morning group. It will probably be a disaster. I'll post photos. I turned off the camera and sat there for a moment, scratching my cat, listening to the house settle around me. Outside, I could hear someone calling good night to some other on the street. Next Sunday, Emily would visit, and I'd tell her about the pub quiz and Maud's heckling and the plans we had to start a gardening group. Because half our gardens had gone to seed and we might as well let them go together. The followers, the likes, the comments. They'd all meant something. But what they'd really done was remind me that I was still here. Still living. Still capable of connection and surprise and joy. Still capable of mattering, to others and to myself. I picked up my phone one more time and typed a message, to no one and everyone. Thank you for reminding me I exist. Now, who wants to teach me about this Instagram thing Emily keeps mentioning? 3 million people answered yes. I laughed and put the phone down. Tomorrow I'd figure out Instagram. Or I wouldn't. Either way, I had coffee morning on Thursday, and book club on Friday, and Janet coming round for lunch on Saturday. My calendar was full. My life was full. At 78, I'd finally learned what I should have known all along. You're never too old to start again. You're never too invisible to be seen. And you're never too lonely to find connection. You just have to be brave enough to share your burnt toast with the world.